What has tech done to writing, to books? How has it affected the life of letters? I mean, you're in a position to sort of really see that. And what has been your experience the last, let's talk about 25 years, because it's roughly 25 years that we've been dealing with this, although the last 15 have probably been more intense. But what's your impressions of as to how it has affected writing and the writing of books?
Well, okay, I'm going to say something jolly about technology, which I think as a writer, just the basics. I mean, you've worked with a typewriter, you've worked probably longhand, or even with like a really early, I had like a Brother word processor in college where you could see like a tiny little line of script on a teeny weeny screen. And so as a writer, the tools are fantastic. I mean, that's inarguable. And I know some people, Bob Carrer, of course, is the most, notable person who says, well, writing things slowly, it forces you to think and slow things down. I don't know. For me, I find how slow and unpracticed I am with a basic thing like handwriting at this point, which is, a fallout of technology, is very frustrating as a writer. I love the fact that having taken typing in high school, I can touch type and I can move things. And I actually think like that all is to the good. If you're talking about technology in terms of its impact on the publishing industry, its impact on the business of journalism, its impact with regard specifically to social media, I think like there the picture is much more complicated. I think that we in all of those fields, I think in publishing and journalism, I think that we tend to mistake what happens on social media as as some kind of indicator of reality, when really it's like, let's take many of the craziest people who we would avoid if we saw them walking down the street, give them a megaphone and allow them to dictate the sort of discourse on, and that's social media. And no matter how many times people will say, in these organizations, like Twitter isn't real life. We know that Twitter isn't the real world. Like part of them still doesn't fully accept that.
Well, if you live in it,
Yeah,
whether you like it or not, it's your real world. I
right.
mean, that's the
Right.
thing. It becomes real. It creates an atmosphere. I agree with you. I think that the word processing is for a writer to be go over and just move a paragraph around to write a horrible sentence and just zip it out as soon
Yeah.
as you write it. These were huge advances. I actually found writing and rewriting obviously much easier in a word processor because the rewrite was so much simpler. You weren't scribbling on top of things you'd already scribbled down and putting
Right.
it was a complicated mess when you went over your first draft in the past. But yeah, so I do think that's true. But obviously for me, the big impact has been the shortening of your average attention span in terms of the written word, in as much as what tech did was really make it much more familiar to people to read things in very short bursts.
Yes.
And they would then become addicted in many ways. We would then become addicted in many ways to that.
Those other poor people that
Those other poor miserable people
with
that don't have
inferior
quite
minds. Yeah.
No, we're all subject to this. And so the ability to really read
Yes.
a long novel or to read a serious nonfiction book and take your time with it in a way, and you've just developed this fidget. There's something that you can't. Even now, when I'm reading like a book, I will find after a chapter, I will check my phone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, several things, and I've obviously written a lot about this, especially with How to Raise a Reader. But you have to think like if we adults who came of age and had decades of being off, not having phones, are having this much trouble paying attention to a long narrative, even though our brains were wired in a pre-internet era, like what is this doing to kids? And people say like, oh, kids can't read. What is shocking to me is I've been going to some universities recently, and professors have essentially like all but stopped assigning books. And if they do, they assign them with the knowledge that very few people will actually read them. And that is, and at top universities, and that's incredibly
So
depressing.
what are they assigning instead?
I mean, it depends on obviously the age, but in high schools, they're often assigning, really short, really easy books, a lot of which is like what kids should ostensibly be reading on their own free time, things that aren't necessarily as challenging, and a lot of excerpts.